Good morning. So, my wife tells me often that I need to smile more, but the way this thing is wrapped around my ear, I keep feeling like I'm grimacing. So, if I'm grimacing, that's why. It's sticking in me. So Julie just read Psalm 42 a few minutes ago, and we just sang As the Deer, which is part of Psalm 42. But now let's process a little bit together some of that psalm. Psalms are basically they're lyrics to songs that are like 3,000 years old. So we don't know the tunes that they went to, but we know the lyrics, so that's pretty neat. So you can also think of them as poetry, like the poem that Maggie read earlier. So it's poetry, it's song lyrics. This is art, and art is it's the medium of the heart. So here the psalmist, or the artist, as he's writing, is pouring out his heart. But also this particular psalm is also a prayer. And the whole psalm is prayer, and lots of the psalms are prayers. So what they are is they're lyrics, but they're lyrics in the form of a prayer. And just like it's just like how some hymns and a lot of the newer worship songs that we sing, they're prayer. Like the first song that we sang earlier for the beauty of the earth, we sang, "Lord of all, to Thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise." It's like that's a prayer, that part of it. Maybe not the other words in the hymn, but that part, it's like you're addressing God. Lord of all, to Thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. In a lot of the modern worship songs are prayers too. So, like when I stand here and I play guitar and I lead you in to some of those songs, a lot of those are prayer songs. So they're songs that are directed right to God, like how a lot of the Psalms are. So, but the artist here is pouring out his heart, but it's prayer. So he's pouring out his heart to God. As the deer longs for streams of water, it says, so my heart, my soul longs for you, God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. It says, when shall I come and behold the face of God? When will I see God? When can I meet with God? And then later he says, these things I remember as I pour out my heart, as I pour out my soul. It sounds like he's really longing for God. And it's not that he doesn't have God, and it's not that he stopped believing in things, right? It's not like there's some special list that he's supposed to subscribe to of things to believe. And if he can just check off those, then he's okay. Check off this one, okay, I'm okay. No, it's not that. Faith is more than that. It's about experiencing God for yourself. It's about the heart. And right now, maybe not always, but right now as he's writing this psalm, for some reason, his heart is empty. It's like he uses imagery of thirst. So it's like when you're hungry and your stomach is empty. It's like he's saying, I'm hungry for God. I'm thirsty for God. My soul thirsts for God. And this is making me thirsty. I might take a little. Anybody wants to take a sip? Now's a good time. But I think that we can all go through times in our lives when we're thirsty for God. And also, I know by experience, we go through times where we're apathetic to God. And maybe right now, your life is great, and you maybe don't really need God with how great things are going, but eventually, you're going to find yourself in a place where you're longing for something more, where you're thirsty for something more, where what you have in your life just isn't enough, and you're going to begin to long for God. You're going to get thirsty. And like the psalmist, you're going to say, and like that song, you're going to say, as the deer pants for streams of water, pants for living streams. As it longs for that, that's the way my soul longs for you. That's going to happen at some point, like that song. And music is a funny thing. The arts in general are. It's like they have this way of making us feel, right? Or maybe it's that they're drawing something out of us, you know? Maybe it's already there. You know, maybe there's some longing. Maybe it's already there, but we're not really in touch with it. That song, the little ditty that I just, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. We can be singing and thinking, okay, after church, I go across the street to am I going to get an A burger or a B burger over there? And then that part of the song, that prayer, that longing, Lord, to thee, And that when we sing that, maybe it just lifts our heart just a little bit, Maybe it helps to draw that out just a little bit, drawing out our desire and our longing for God. Last week, my wife, Linda, and I, sweetie, we were standing here and we were helping to lead you in that song, that new worship song, Spirit Speaks. Your Spirit speaks, it moves in me, and I'm awakened to your love, awakened to your love. And then it says, you're drawing me onto my knees, and I'm astounded by your love. When we're astounded by his love, we're awakened to him. When I sing that, it's like I'm allowing myself to feel, and I'm letting it just draw something out of me, maybe something that's there already. And suddenly I find myself in that place. I find myself awakened to God. And I find myself astounded by God's love. So maybe there's this longing that's just kind of built in, It's there. It's in us. St. Augustine in the 4th century, he said that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Maybe you've heard that before. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. So we're pouring out our hearts to God in longing for God. But not just in terms of longing. We're pouring out our hearts to God, but not just in terms of longing. But we also pour out our hearts to God in terms of, like when we're downcast. This psalm, Psalm 42, it's a lament psalm. Lament isn't a word that we use all the time, but it means to express yourself to God in times of sorrow. About a third of the psalms, good chunk of the psalms are lament psalms. Some of them you look at and you read, and they're very up, but a good amount of them, the person who's writing them, the artist who's penning them, is going through a hard time. And, so these psalms they're laments, they're complaints before God, they're protests to God, protesting to God. But a lament is when you're pouring out your heart to God during times of, when you're going through grief or times of mourning. When you're pouring out your heart to God, when you're depressed or when you're feeling broken, those are laments. When we're overcome with sadness or we're in despair, we pour out our hearts to God. I mean, we can't be happy all the time, right? I mean, this is real life we're talking about. In verse 5 and verse 11, the psalmist in the psalm here says, why are you so downcast, my soul? And why are you so disquieted or disturbed? Why are you so disturbed within me? So this psalmist is in a bad place, but he's getting his feelings and he's bringing them to God. He's pouring out his soul to God. And in the Psalms, when the psalmists lament, it isn't always pretty, when you're angry at God, when you're depressed, when you're full of grief, you find that suddenly your prayers aren't necessarily so polite. You're, when you've lost something or someone, it's, why, God, right? You just yell, you scream, you cuss, you swear. You just give God an earful. The first line of the poem that Maggie read said, you do not have to be good. You do not have to be good, Mary Oliver. When you're at that point, it's not, your prayers don't have to be polished. You don't have to make sure you're saying it the right way, because when you're at that point, you're not even thinking that way. You're not thinking about being theologically accurate at that point. If you need to ask God to forgive you after, but you got to go through that. It's not about that. It's about what you're feeling, and it's about being able to express that to a loving God. We want to be healthy human beings, right? We don't want to hold it in, and we want to grow into spiritual maturity. And part of that is learning how to express our heart to God when we're downcast. And if you're upset, like really upset, and you express that to God, kicking and screaming, shaking your fist at God, to lay into God like that, it's like you have to be really confident, in your relationship with God. You have to, your relationship has to be able to stand that, and I think it can. I mean, do you think God can handle that? Do you think God can handle you coming and just pouring it all out? I do. I know God can. It's like God's a big boy, big girl. God wants to be there for you when you need to vent. We can totally be unfiltered with God. We don't need to censor our words. You can be honest with God. God's not going to be offended by something that you say. When you come and you just pour it all out, God's not going to hear something that you're not going to say or think something or feel something that God's going to be cut off by. It's like, oh, I've never heard anybody say that before. Wow, that person's really messed up. You think God's new on the block? A friend of mine, Albert Lamar, I used to play music with him a lot, and sometimes he would say, he's from the South, and sometimes he would say, John, this isn't my first rodeo. And you think this is God's first rodeo, his first time around the block? It's okay. We don't have to put our best face on for God. But in verse 3 and then also in verse 10 of the psalm, it says, people are saying, where is God? It says that in the psalm. People are saying, where is God? And it's like the psalmist is like, yeah, where are you, God? We sometimes find that it feels like God is not there. So we're pouring out our hearts to God when we're longing. We were talking about earlier. We're pouring out our hearts to God when we're lamenting, when we're at a point like when Lucian was sharing earlier, where we're angry, we have passion. We just pour that out. But also, what about when it feels like God isn't there? In verse 6, the psalmist says, I remember you, in speaking to God. I remember you. But then, like a few verses later, in verse 9, he says, why have you forgotten me? It's like, I remember you, God. Do you? Why have you forgotten me? Where are you? Sometimes God can feel so close, and sometimes it feels like God's a million miles away. It's like God's a no-show. It's like Elvis has left the building. Well, where are you, God? I need you now. And it feels like God is asleep at the wheel. But here the psalmist is pouring out his soul, and he's dialoguing with God, even though he's doubting if God is there. So thinking back the time of Jesus is hanging on the cross. He's feeling abandoned by his friends, his disciples. He's feeling abandoned by God. Where is he? Where is God? And then Jesus He must have memorized this line from another Psalm of Laments, not this one, but Psalm 22, because he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? Where are you when I need you now? Those were some of the last words that Jesus said as he's hanging on the cross. Very human. I'm so glad that Jesus said that. I'm so glad that Jesus didn't say, no, I'm good. I'm okay. We got the big picture here. I'm not complaining. No complaints here. No, he complained. He lamented. He poured out his heart to God, even though he was questioning at that moment if God was even there. Why have you forsaken? Why have you left me? Where are you? But to be able to do that, to pour out your heart, to be honest, to be able to shake your fist at God, to do this and to pour out your heart to God, to do that is actually to have hope. Because when we're doing that, we're dialoguing with someone. Verse 5 and verse 11 says, put your hope in God. It says, put your hope in God. Why are you so downcast, O my soul? It's like the psalmist is talking to himself, utilizing positive self-talk. It's like, put your hope in God. Like he's going through it. He's saying, I'm just throwing it all out there. But then he turns around and he's like, put your hope in God. He's telling himself. I mean, if we're 100% honest, if we're going to be 100% honest with God and with ourselves, then we're definitely going to have to, if we're pouring out our complaints, we're definitely going to have to be able to, engage in some positive self-talk and remember what God promises elsewhere in the scriptures, that he is going to be with us, that God is going to be with us. But hope is like saying, we refuse to settle for things as they are. It's like we're shooting higher for that. We refuse to settle for things how they are. Right now, God may be distant, but I know he's there. Right now, God, I'm going through a really hard time, but I'm going through it with God. We refuse to settle for things the way we are. We're looking forward. That's what hope is. Because we're thinking, God's got to have a plan beyond this. So in verse 5 and 11, again, he says, for I will yet again praise God, my help and my God. It's like, I might not be there now. I might not be at that place now where I can praise, where I can hope. And you might not be there. You might be at a place where you can pour out your heart to God and just everything, You might be but you maybe feel like, you know what? That's okay. I can't go that far. I can't hope right now. But that's all right. Maybe you can't, You will. Maybe you can't. And that's part of community. When you can't hope, then I can hope for you. And then when I lose my way, or when I'm lost in the mess and I can't hope, then you can hope for me. As I just kind of finish up here, you know what God is like? Because behind all of this is that God can handle this. God can handle us pouring out our heart. But you know what God is like? God is like a best friend who knows you so well that you can say anything. You can say anything to God. Not going to be surprised. Isn't going to make a judgment that you said such and such. They're going to understand. They're not going to take offense. They know what you mean by that. That's what God is like for us. We don't have to worry. God's like family. God knows us. Wants us to be able to get through our stuff, but then really wants to see us come out on the other side. Like a good parent wants us to be able to thrive and to flourish. So as we learn together to pour out our hearts to God, as we long for God, but also as we're pouring our hearts to God, as we're lamenting and sharing our suffering with God, and even pouring out our hearts to God when we feel like, where is he? God is not here. And as we learn to do this well, that's when we're practicing hope. It's like that first line. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. As we finish up, let's just close our eyes right now and sing that one line with me. All together, everyone. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. Yeah. Amen.